Welcome to Espresso Talks, your source for interviews with a wide range of unique people from diverse backgrounds around the world. I'm your host, Anthony T. Eaton. Gary, it is a great honor and it's a privilege to have the opportunity to sit down with you today and spend some time talking about your career and the Sounds of Blackness. I really appreciate it. Can't tell you how much.
Oh, well, thank you. The feeling is mutual, my friend, on behalf of all Sounds of Blackness.
You have been the director and producer of the Sounds of Blackness for 50 years now. What drew you to that back in 1971?
Well, that's a great question. You and I are both the products or an involvement with the Minneapolis public school system. With me, it was Minneapolis Central, and then working with North High as well, where, of course, Terry Lewis attended. So all that background was there. But as I matriculated to Macalester College, my alma mater across the river in St. Paul, they had embarked on a very ambitious program to really conscientiously recruit students of color. It was called EEO, Expanded Educational Opportunities. And the college was very successful in that effort. At one time, they had nearly 100 African-American students and other students of color on campus. And one of the offshoots of that, my friend, was that the students themselves organized a number of different activities, organizations. There was a political group, which still exists, I understand, called BLAC, the Black Liberation Affairs Committee. There was a theater group called Black Arts Midwest. This was 1969, actually, so predating the actual Sounds of Blackness. So I'll make that connection momentarily. In 1969, there was the Macalester College Black Voices, which was founded by our emeritus founder, who's also a Texan, a native of Beaumont, Texas, Russell Knighton. So we always give him those props. And he had this magnificent 50-voice choir, the Macalester Black Voices. When I came on campus, he was preparing to graduate in 71 and approached me about assuming directorship of the group. And I was very honored to do that because even back then they were very excellent. And, the vision the good Lord gave me was to continue the tradition of Duke Ellington. Now that surprises a lot of people when I say that, because we hear Duke Ellington's name and we think of jazz, as we should. But too many people don't know that Duke wrote, recorded, and performed anthems, spirituals, hymns, gospel, blues, world beat, as we would call it, music, every sound of blackness. And so that template for doing all the music of the culture, we can't claim credit for that. We call Duke Ellington our musical mentor. And so that's the meaning and origin of the name Sounds of Blackness, every sound of the Black experience.
That is so interesting. I did not know that. I appreciate the history lesson. Did you think it would be 50 years?
That's another great question. You know what? I'm going to maybe surprise you with this answer. In our own naive and idealistic student enthusiasm way back in 71, the answer would have to be yes, for two reasons, my friend. One, the great now Professor Emeritus Mahmoud El-Kadi, who happens to be the father of the great R&B vocalist Stokely, also out of St. Paul Central, across the river from Minneapolis Central, of course. Professor El-Kadi was professor at Macalester at the time, and he is a world-renowned, to this day, African and African-American history professor. And where he fits into the equation in answering your question is that he was our cultural and historical mentor from day one. And he told us from day one to be more than just a band, to be a cultural institution. We incorporated in 1975. So we're technically Sound of Blackness Incorporated. We are a 501c3. That's why on our website we have a donation page and all that kind of thing. That surprises, like, you guys are a nonprofit? No, yes, we are. And so with that in mind, we always thought that to become something that was ongoing, that would pass on to generations, and to close out the answer, by God's grace and by the dedication and sweat of a lot of dedicated members and former members, that's coming to fruition because a number of our current members are actually offspring of original members. So technically, this is Sounds of Blackness second generation. So yes, we did actually envision being an ongoing entity. And the last thing I'll say is we're also frequently asked, did you guys ever, in your wildest dreams as students, imagine that you would one day travel the world and win Grammys? And once again, the answer was yes. I mean, in our youthful enthusiasm, we would sit around after rehearsals and say, you know what? One day we're going to have our own airplane and we're going to travel all over the world. Now, of course, this is students in the 70s, but we believe, and we're going to win Grammys and we're going to tour all over the place. And lo and behold, the good Lord brought that.
Well, I think if you can envision it, you can make it come true.
Yes,
So
sir.
how has music evolved, especially for the generation that may not have been around in the 70s? If you can describe how that change has come about.
Well, the more things change, the more they remain the same type of thing. But music has always been, I think always will, at its core, be very organic. I mean, just the nature of sound and sound creation, that's really a spiritual entity, no matter beyond faith traditions and all that kind of thing. I mean, we are more than human beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a human experience. And music is part of that. Music is vibration, and vibration is life. Now, with the digital and technological advances that, of course, have permeated the music industry as well, many of the production techniques and methods have changed. But again, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Many recordings now are digital recording, which of course is the state of the art now. Its strengths are how clean and how its fidelity and its dexterity in terms of the recording process and all that kind of thing. But your strength can be your weakness. It's so clean that it loses the warmth of analog recording. And so many of the recordings that we hear today were recorded digitally, but then run through an analog program to give it the warmth of analog of earlier years programming, and then finally mastered digitally or remastered. That's why I started answering a question by saying what's old is new, and what goes around comes around, just on the technical music production side.
That's very true. I think if you go back and you listen to older LPs, you can definitely hear that difference between the way things were produced. Think to the Motown days, right? The wall of sound and all of that. It's
Yes.
so unique and different from a lot of what we're hearing today that in some instances can be almost overproduced.
Yes.
Your achievements personally and the achievements of the Sound of Blackness are huge. You've got Grammys, you've traveled the world, you've been on world stages. What are you personally most proud of?
Anthony, I'd say probably the resilience, the perseverance, the dedication of Sounds of Blackness singers and band. Now, again, yours truly is the only original member, as I mentioned earlier. Much of our current crew are actually offspring of originals. But even in our band, as well as some of our singers, we have some 20 and 30-year members, and they are the foundation and just the rock and core of this group. So above and beyond even the Grammys and the world travel, and those are just amazing blessings, and we do treasure them. We'd be less than honest if we said we didn't. The thing I'd have to say I'm most proud of, to try to answer your question, is their stick-to-itiveness, to drop all the fancy terms, because without that, it all only happens by the grace of God, and like I say, by a lot of sweat. Their sweat equity and dedication to this day is something that I'm just immensely proud of.
Great answer. I love that. Your work in music and the work in music of the Sound of Blackness has influenced and left an indelible mark on more than one generation. As you pointed out, the group is comprised of second generation now. How has it changed you as a person?
I tell you, it's made me, as the chef, Emeril Lagasse, has the phrase, kick it up a notch. The group has made me kick it up a notch. Now, what is it? It is everything that I do as a musical director, as a musician, pianist with the group, as a conductor, as a producer, all of the above. Their level of productivity and performance has demanded and commanded me to always increase the level of what I do. And so that's what's changed me. Just when I thought, I couldn't be any more intense or any more dedicated or any greater level of work ethic, ethic in terms of my daily preparation, practice, and rehearsal, and performance preparation and songwriting. Lo and behold, the level of excellence that they've established commands and demands that I up my game, and that's a game changer.
That makes sense. You've worked with some of the biggest talent in the entertainment industry. We've seen a lot of loss of talent over the years. Some of the most talented performers I can think of, some of them have fallen victim to, the pitfalls of being an entertainer, having fame, all of that. How have you avoided those kind of pitfalls that come along with the entertainment industry?
First and foremost, only by the grace of God. Second, knock on wood, that I continue to hopefully avoid them, because it's no sooner than you say how you did something and something else comes up. But seriously, I think the main thing is, again, by the grace of God, having an active and daily and steady prayer life and spiritual center, but, being way far from perfect and acknowledging the support of the Sounds of Blackness, of my family, siblings, nieces, nephews, and even beyond those that we've lost, parents and my brothers, that I know that ancestor energy is inspiring me and inspiring the group as well. That's really, I think, the best answer that I can give in terms of avoiding those things. And we're trying to learn from them, and knowing that none of us is above or beyond any of those snares and toils, to acknowledge them, that they're there, to face them, and then to govern yourself accordingly. And then hopefully, as Spike Lee says, to do the right thing.
I would agree with you on that. And I think that having that base of faith, whatever your faith may be, is very important. And also to realize that, none of us are perfect. One of the people that we lost was a good friend of yours, someone that I recognize, Prince.
Yes.
I know that this has come up in other interviews, but what's one of the most fond memories that you have of him?
That's a really tough one, a great question. Let me try to sort that out. There's so many realms, Anthony. There's the professional and studio and performance and rehearsal. Things happen in all of those arenas. And, at the party realm out at Paisley and First Ave and Sheets and so many other places, Prince, for all of his undeniable musical genius and accomplishments, in many ways was a prankster, a great sense of humor. I have to say probably this. He knew that a lot of people didn't know about his exceptional athletic prowess, especially as a basketball player. Despite his height, he was an all-city basketball player, and you probably were aware of that. At a basketball school, to even make the team, you had to really be good. But he made it, and he was all-city. But of course, as he became a Prince international icon, that kind of got lost in the shuffle. Artists and athletes, movie stars, all that would come out to Paisley, of course, to visit. We're in Minneapolis. And oftentimes, especially with the athletes, Prince always kept a basketball hoop out on the soundstage floor. And so some of these, jocks would come out there, all pros, and he'd say, how about a little one-on-one? And they'd laugh because they thought he was joking. It's like, what, are you kidding me? And he would get them out there and take them to the hole, as they say, because they didn't know, So that was probably one of the fondest fun memories of him doing that.
It is definitely a unique fact. Is there anybody that you still want to work with that you haven't worked with?
There are several. Oh, let me see. In no particular order, a number come to mind. Some that we know and have met and are familiar with each other, but have not actually, as your question says, have not actually worked together yet. Certainly the great Jennifer Hudson, who's just a force of nature vocally and as an actress, and on and on, is one. Oh my goodness. The great Earth, Wind and Fire, who we're longtime friends with Verdine and Philip. We appeared on some of the same stages, but have not worked together yet and have talked about it, kind of thing. So those are two and there are several others, but those two just immediately come to mind.
That's cool. Is there somebody that you admire that is coming up in the business? Is there somebody where you say, wow, that is the talent of today?
And again, there's a few. My grandmother used to say, follow your first mind. So my first mind, the first one that came to my mind is Alicia Keys. She reminds me of the late, great Nat King Cole. And I'll tell you why. Um, of course, most people think of Nat King Cole as the just consummate vocalist, and as they should, because he was. But too many people don't know he was a virtuoso pianist. And when he would go tour overseas, and particularly in Europe, and we know this because my mom, the late great Doris Hines, was a contemporary of his. They came to each other's shows. She was a great jazz singer, rest her soul. Oftentimes, when he would get booked, Nat King Cole in Europe, they would tell him, the promoters would gently say, Mr. Cole, we love your singing, but we really want to hear you play. So they weren't telling him not to sing, but that asking him to please make his piano playing more prominent, in whatever concert or show that he was going to. To me, now a lot of people would differ with me on this, but to me as a musician, that's how I am with Alicia Keys. I love her voice. I love her songwriting, her singing, but she is a beast on piano. I think people sort of know that, but I don't know that they know it to the degree of her virtuosity.
Interesting that you say that, because I think another great artist who's no longer with us that falls into that category was Nina Simone.
Nina Simone.
Probably a lot of people know this. It's not a hidden secret, but she came up. That was her original aspiration, was to be a concert pianist. The times being what they were, that didn't happen for her, but she was still an amazing piano player.
Oh, as we would say nowadays, a beast.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can't speak to you here without, of course, asking you about the tragedy that happened in our hometown with George Floyd. How did that touch you? Because I know how it touched me. I'm very interested in what your reaction to it was, and the events that followed that.
In a number of ways, and I'll try to be as concise as I can, because there were and still are some personal connections to Brother George Floyd with Sounds of Blackness and myself. I couldn't say that he was a friend of mine. We worked out at the same gym, and he worked security for one of our lead singers, Jamesia Bennett. There were those personal connections. Anthony, George was murdered 5 blocks away from where we rehearse. Sounds of Blackness rehearse at 5 blocks from Sabathani Community Center, right in the heart of the Black community in South Minneapolis. 5 blocks away. Just the physical proximity of it just added salt to the wound, or whatever phrase you want to use. The other thing is that it was impossible for me to not feel and think of and see this from a historical perspective, because it was lynching. And lynching has happened to African Americans for centuries in one form or another. This was a modern day lynching in real time, caught on camera for the world to see. And thank God the world reacted to it, and still is. So on the most visceral level, Anthony, and in many different ways, the murder of George Floyd was and still is devastating.
I couldn't agree with you more. I was both shocked, disgusted, very saddened that something like that happened in our hometown. Not that I am blind or ignorant to the fact that there was and still is a racial divide, but I so expected and thought more of our community as a whole. Do you think we've learned anything from this? Do you think we've made any advances? I mean, I wasn't around when the civil rights movement was happening. I wasn't born yet, but I'm very familiar with my history and our history as people collectively. Do you think we've made any advances, really?
Well, in terms of your first part of your question, I think we have learned things, and not all of them good. One of them you already alluded to, in that despite Banner of Minnesota nice, there was also, right under the veneer, Minnesota not nice. And the realities, vestiges of white supremacy and racism and injustice and inequality. Donald Trump and then Chauvin helped to pull that veneer off and expose it for where it is. Now, thank God it wasn't everywhere and not nearly with everyone, but it does, as you alluded to, still does exist. So we learned that. We also learned, though, that people of all backgrounds, and Anthony, I'll never forget this, tens of thousands came together, not only here in Minneapolis, white, black, men, women, young, old, every faith tradition, no faith tradition, whatever, were there to support not only in Minneapolis, but around the world. And The song that I wrote and Sounds of Blackness performed for George, called Sick and Tired, was inspired not only by his murder, but I'll never forget this. Sounds of Blackness, our normal rehearsal night is Tuesday, a vocal rehearsal. And as you recall, George was killed on a Monday, and the first rally was that next day, Tuesday, right on 38th in Chicago. The media downplayed how many people were there. There were thousands and thousands of people there. And this young lady, a Caucasian young teenage, came up to me, and she was proudly holding a Black Lives Matter sign, Anthony. And she apparently recognized me from the group. And she said, "Hey, Mr. Sounds of Blackness, you guys are one of my favorite groups." And she said, "I bet you guys are going to do a song about this." And I nodded my head. I said, "Yes, ma'am." And she said, the next thing that she said really stuck with me, Anthony. She said, "Please don't make it a happy song." And I said, "You know what, young lady, I promise you that will not happen." And no sooner than I spoke those words, Anthony, literally I could hear the voice and the words of the late, great Fannie Lou Hamer, who of course originated the phrase, "I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired." And that phrase would not leave me alone. I was up a couple of days and nights writing that song, kind of thing. And so all of that was in the mix for how I reacted, how Sounds of Blackness reacted, and in terms of what we learned about us coming together, because people of all backgrounds and all over the world, we're blessed with some fan club, Sounds of Blackness is, in different countries, and one in Germany. We have a president, a good friend and brother, Rainer Lamper, and Rainer is the head of what he calls the Germany crew. And whenever we're in like London or whatever, he in the Germany crew, about 20, 25 people sojourn all the way from Germany to UK and London and attend our performances. Even in Dusseldorf, where Rainer lives, 20,000 people were in the streets of Dusseldorf kneeling in honor of George Floyd. And so it was a worldwide phenomenon, and something that showed some of the worst of us, but also showed the best of us.
I would agree with that. I don't think there's even words to describe really what it was, but it did bring out the best in some people. I think it also brought out the worst, to your point. It did really pull off the veneer of some underlying and unresolved issues in this country. And as I was thinking about it and thinking about our interview and our talk, I couldn't help but think about how the social changes that have happened in this country have influenced music. Music has also influenced that social change.
Absolutely.
And we've seen that yet again. Have you drawn that comparison?
Oh, absolutely, my brother. Yes, yes, Anthony. And proudly, much of the phenomena you just described has happened right here in Minnesota. Our dear friend, who we were blessed to be on a tribute album, Bob Dylan. The times they are changing. I mean, and of course, Prince, when the brother was killed in Baltimore, he wrote the song and recorded Baltimore. And I tell people all the time, believe me, had he still been alive, when George Floyd was murdered, what, you think he would have done that in Baltimore and not in Minneapolis? I guarantee you, he would have been there for that. So a lot of Minnesota roots in response to that. And it brings to mind, Anthony, the quote of the great Paul Robeson, who once said, "All true artists have a responsibility to their people." And Sounds of Blackness takes that very seriously. But thankfully, we're not the only artists who take that seriously as well. And we were blessed to collab with our dear brother from Chicago, Common, who, of course, is an actor and rapper and artist. But really, he likes at the top of his credentials to be called activist, because he was here, aside from the cameras and all that, at the protests and all that kind of thing, even before we did the 1-year anniversary tribute to Brother George some months ago.
You said something that I think is very important, and I had this conversation with somebody else that I recently interviewed, that activism takes many forms. We all have a role to play in changing the world, our society, even if it's just one small thing that can make a difference. We can all be an activist by doing something. I commend those people who were not silent when that was happening to him. It's unfortunate that it did happen, but I don't think that his death or his life will be in vain. And I think that already some really positive things have come of that. What advice would you give to new artists coming up in the business today? Because it's so different than what it was. It has changed and evolved so much.
Yes, my advice, Anthony, to today's upcoming artists would be, one, to remember some words that all start with P, okay? And the first is prayer or meditation. If you're not a person of faith, that's fine. But again, we are spiritual beings having a human experience, however you want to. And music is of the spirit. It emanates from it. What comes from the heart reaches the heart. So having that spiritual center, again, aside from any faith tradition, and being in touch with that, because that's going to help you be true to who you are, to who your music is, and to what your music is saying. Which brings me to the next P, and that's practice. To practice your craft daily. No matter what else is going on, find time to improve, to upgrade, to hone your craft daily on some level. The other P is persistence, persistence and or perseverance, because this industry and I think life in general, and in terms of the pursuit of our goals, is about persevering. Things generally don't happen overnight. And actually, believe it or not, even though we may think so, we really don't want them to. I mean, it's a process. And to attain and obtain the benefits of that, it's about being persistent and persevering with it, which brings me to another P, perspiration. This is not for the faint of heart. I tell my vocalists, the singers in Sounds of Blackness all the time, singing is a sport. To exercise all of this, the apparatus, this is a muscle and all exercise not only the voice but your chops, whatever your instrument is. So that brings me back, to the first P in terms, or the second one in terms of practice. But it's about perspiration, not only artistically but even in your pursuit of whatever your goals are in this industry. So all of those P's for sure. And after though you're set with those P's, to thine own self be true, because one of the first things that the industry frequently tries to do is to turn you into something that you're not. Okay, and if they do express interest in you in terms of a contract or a production deal, whatever, to try to make you the flavor of the month as opposed to bringing out who and what you are. Well, lo and behold, the artists that break out 9 times out of 10 are not the cookie cutter, but they're the ones that really establish their own niche and in terms of who they are, their identity, their music, and then they become the flavor of the month. In order to be true to yourself, you got to know who you are and what you're about. And so that's why all of those internal kind of processes, I started first with my answer, because a lot of times I think artists are pursuing the dream that they don't realize that it starts within, and all that is self-development, self-awareness that will reflect itself in the music.
That is very well said, because it's really a journey, right? It's not a
Yeah.
destination.
If I could add 2 more P's to that to
You
close it out.
absolutely can.
Well, actually 3. One of my professors once told me, your passion should be your profession. And so is this your passion? And if it is, then you do what it takes to make it your profession.
That's a great point. I love that. So what's coming up for the Sounds of Blackness and for you? What's in the near and maybe not so near future?
Well, a few things, Anthony. As the holiday season finished out, we re-released our virtual Christmas concert through the end of the year. But then also, as we go into January with Martin Luther King celebrations, and then leading into Black History Month in February, a lot of interesting things going on, especially the professional sports league, WNBA, the NBA, the NHL, believe it or not, the NFL. A lot of them are having campaigns about racial justice, of facing this thing square on. Sounds of Blackness have been asked, even locally here, by all of the major sports franchises, leagues, to be a part of some of those activities. The Minnesota Vikings, obviously NFL, the Minnesota Timberwolves, of course, NBA, and the Minnesota Wild, NHL, who's acknowledging some of the hockey origins with some African-American players and outreach. So doing some really unusual things. So we're gearing up. The group's on a brief hiatus for about a week and a half, over the Christmas New Year's season. But then right after January, we're back in the saddle with rehearsals, and those are coming up. We were blessed to do a song for that called Black Lives Matter. And now, with HR 40 submitted by Congressional Black Caucus, and reparations really becoming a discussion and a movement, we figured that needed a song. And so we submitted it for the Image Awards, but we're moreover trying to establish it as an anthem. So a few things under the belt, and we've got a wonderful new single that we just released a few weeks ago called To the Sky. And that's features our own Jamesia Bennett. She wrote and produced the song and the video, which is available on YouTube.
That's great stuff. And, I think that it is so important when we talk about reparations because we must right the wrongs of the past, whether it is the African American community, our Native American brother and sisters,
Yes,
LGBTQ people, all people who have been held back, repressed, taken advantage of, underrepresented. We have to change, and the only way we can do that, I think, is to right those wrongs. And
absolutely, my
yes,
friend.
we can't undo the past, and we shouldn't, but we have to really embrace it, I think, as people of all colors and ethnicities and backgrounds if we are truly going to be united in the world.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you said what you just said because it made me think of two other things in terms that were also are part of the answer to your previous question, but will expand on what you just alluded to. One is in terms of bringing all people together, and Sounds of Blackness are known for that, and we're very proud of that. We have another single coming up called Hold Up Your Light, written by our own Carrie Harrington, who's a very talented songwriter, singer, one of our lead singers, and our choreographer. Hold Up Your Light, we're looking to release the first part of 2022. And we also have, in keeping with the last thing you just said, Brother Anthony, and I can't believe I forgot to mention this, current EP that we released called The Justice Project. And it is an amalgam of all the recent singles that we've done that are justice oriented. So it includes titles like, of course, Time for Reparations, Black Lives Matter, Sick and Tired, Royalty, Change the World, and Hold On Just a Little While Longer. So we've got the Justice Project, and of course, that's available on our website, soundsofblackness.org. And again, as I mentioned, Hold Up Your Light will be coming after not too long. We're still promoting To the Sky, the single I mentioned. So all of those are projects, along with the Justice Project, that we're undertaking currently.
Wow, that's a lot, Gary, and it's impressive. But I'm not surprised given your history and the history of the Sounds of Blackness. I think that you are and have done great work and will do great work in the future, and can't wait to see the results of that. I really appreciate the time that you have spent with me here today, and can't thank you enough for it. You've been so great to speak with. It's always great to talk to somebody from, back home, if you will.
We'd love to invite everyone who's gracious enough to watch this, to engage with Sounds of Blackness online. Please, we're on all the different formats, starting with our website. It's just our name. So our website is soundsofblackness.org. If you do .com, it's going to go there. So just remember Sounds of Blackness. That's our website. And we've got wonderful merchandise there, hoodies, masks, hats, all those. And I would be remiss if I didn't say, it's not only just for its own worth. Sounds of Blackness are continuing to donate a portion of the proceeds from our sales, from everything from Sick and Tired and Time for Reparations and our merchandise. We are donating a portion of those proceeds to the George Floyd Scholarship Foundation. So you can get in touch with us, and you'll be killing two birds with one stone. Not that we want to kill birds, but we're also available on other formats. Twitter, LinkedIn, TikTok, Instagram. Just type in Sounds of Blackness, and we'd love to engage with any and all of you.
Again, I can't thank you enough, Gary.
Again, on behalf of Sounds of Blackness, we truly thank you.
Okay.